Do you struggle with codependency? Is there a narcissist in your life whose abusive tactics are eroding your joy, self-confidence, and energy? Unfortunately, issues like these are widespread in today's world, and they affect people of all ages and genders. And given the prevalence of both narcissistic abuse and codependency, it's likely that you or someone you know has encountered or is currently wrestling with these extremely challenging and destructive dynamics. Yet in my clinical work and research, I've found that it's certainly possible to gain the awareness, strength, and courage it takes to learn, grow, and heal. Today, I'm joined by a psychologist who is renowned for her expertise in helping people recognize, understand, and change unhealthy patterns that get in the way of secure attachment, healthy relationships, and the genuine love they deserve. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life concern. I never realized that I was surrounded by narcissists until my daughter started showing me TikTok videos that have blown my mind. I feel kind of stupid for not putting the pieces together. I grew up in an era where parents and men pretty much did as they pleased. The videos helped me see patterns in my dad, mom, sister, and friends that I passed off as normal or just plain mean behavior. There's so much gaslighting and me behaviors that I've been taking as normal or okay. Now that my eyes are open, I want to stand up for myself and make changes, but I'm afraid. And with that issue as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Manly, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by a wonderful special guest, Dr. Sarah Schewitz. She is the founder of coupleslearn.com. Dr. Sarah's work focuses on narcissism, attachment wounds, and building healthy relationships. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Sarah. It's a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
So, before we launch into the heart of today's podcast, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Sure. I feel like that's a lot to unpack, but one of my passions as a psychologist is helping people recognize and heal attachment wounding from their past to have healthier relationships. And I think that's part of what makes me me, because I experienced attachment wounding in childhood and could relate to some of what this question is about, actually. And I think in our greatest healing lies our greatest teaching as well. And so I think that's part of what makes me me, is that the things I talk about professionally, I have recovered from and gone through personally and come out on the other side of, and am excited to help other people do the same.
Thank you so much for your honesty and your genuineness. And you and I are very much aligned already, because I believe we can learn so much from books, so much from our very lengthy, doctoral education and all of that. Yet, having gone through, on a personal level, not that you can't be a great clinician without having gone through a lot of trauma and healed from it, but there's something about having faced the issues that you're working with, faced them, worked through them, that gives you that awareness, that knowledge on a cellular level, on a soul level, that helps you get people in a very non-judgmental, empathic way. Like, yes, even if you're not saying, yes, I've been there, I get you, you're feeling, and there, I believe, are feeling, yes, you get me.
Yep.
And I
That's so
think,
true.
so important. So
Yeah.
thank you for that lovely introduction into part of what makes you you. So when we look at today's question, and it's a big one, or it really has a lot of levels to it. So let's start, if you don't mind, as someone who really works a lot with attachment theory and believes in it. I would really like to set the stage for our listeners who may be unfamiliar with attachment theory. Could you give us a nice, gentle background on it that's easy to process?
Yeah, everybody kind of grows and develops in their relationships based on how they were parented. And whether you had a mom and a dad or grandparents or whoever were caretakers in the foster system, it doesn't matter. But through that, you developed your attachment style. And usually in the first 18 months of life, actually, is when our attachment style is developed. And there's four different types of attachment styles, but they fall into two categories: secure and insecure. And people with secure attachments, I feel like, won the lottery. They tend to have an easy time in relationships for the most part. They tend to find it easy to trust people. They're pretty optimistic about how relationships will go. They are pretty good at setting boundaries and respecting boundaries. And overall, relationships just seem like they're going to be a pretty good time, and they are a pretty good time for people with secure attachment. And then folks with insecure attachment, which could either fall under anxious, avoidant, or a combination called disorganized attachment. They just have a harder time. They didn't get everything they needed in childhood. Even if their caretakers had the best of intentions, they just weren't able to meet all the attachment needs that are necessary to form a secure attachment. And so they have different challenges in relationships. They might have challenges setting boundaries. They might have challenges respecting boundaries, communicating their wants and needs, maybe even recognizing their wants and needs. They may have worthiness wounds where they feel like they aren't worthy of having their wants and needs met. So, yeah, all kinds of little challenges can bubble up, and big challenges can bubble up from having an insecure attachment style.
Thank you for that foundation. And as a believer in attachment theory, and I work and write books from that perspective, it is so important to realize that it's not your fault. It's no use blaming parents or caregivers. It's a big boost to understand it, to just say, oh, this is what happened to me. Mom and dad were both really preoccupied with making money, so they weren't showing up and paying attention to me. So I am constantly looking for someone to pay attention to me. Or if somebody does pay attention to me, sometimes it's really scary. And whatever the dynamic might be, or mom and dad, or mom or dad were, alcoholics or both highly critical. So I never felt safe. I could never trust. And interestingly, you brought up a really beautiful part about secure attachment. The secure attached people, they're not perfect. They have issues like everyone else, but they tend to gravitate toward secure partners. So you have a secure and things go well. Doesn't mean a secure person can end up with someone who is, in the insecure realm. But what's interesting that you brought up the piece of trust. They tend to trust. And I really appreciate that because their radar for trust is based upon the trust they learned early in childhood. So they tend to not get sucked into relationships where people are untrustworthy. It can happen to all of us. We can be gamed or manipulated by somebody who's really good at it, but they tend to have a better radar for it because they grew up knowing the difference between someone who's strong and true and genuine and knowing someone who's manipulating them. So for our listeners who might be thinking, yeah, but I must be broken because I'm the one who gets manipulated, or I keep having these serious, it's not your fault. It's how you were raised, it's how you were programmed. So thank you for setting the stage there. That's so beautiful. And when we look at, so now let's get a definition of codependency and then we'll do narcissistic abuse. And codependency had its earliest roots in actually AA, where it was seen as being, codependent within a relationship where addiction, some form of addiction, was taking place. But it's expanded. So today we use it for all sorts of relationship dynamic descriptors. Could you please explain how you're going to use it today so that we are staying within that framework?
Yeah. I'm going to use it loosely, I'd say, because there's no clinical, definition for codependency that's like, this is, these are the differentiating factors and this is how we diagnose this. It's not an official diagnosis. But it is kind of a pattern of behavior that looks similar amongst a lot of individuals. And some of the challenges that we see in folks who struggle with codependency is that, I've brought up the word boundaries like 3 times already in this conversation. And this is probably because I have codependency on my mind. Really hard time setting boundaries, respecting boundaries, understanding what their boundaries even are. They tend to overgive, and then a lot of times they feel resentful as a result. They may not even realize they feel resentful until they aren't getting back what they unconsciously expect they should be getting back in return. And then suddenly they're irritable and snippy, and they actually may not even have insight into why, unless they're doing some good, work around this. But they, may feel resentful, may feel irritable, may feel like things are unequal in their relationship. But instead of talking about it or leaving if they've talked about it ad nauseum and it's not working, they just continually try to change their partner and fix their partner. A lot of times they end up dating folks who are emotionally immature and don't necessarily have the capability to look within and reflect on themselves. And so the codependent's doing that work for them and that emotional work for them. And then there's 2 different types of codependency. You talked about how this originated in AA back, a long time ago. And the kind of prototypical codependent from the AA days was someone who was a little bit more on the helpless side. They might have been dependent on their partner and meek in a way, like not necessarily asserting their needs and not necessarily arguing or pushing back, but just kind of enabling their partner to do what they want without a ton of pushback. That would be what we call a more passive codependent. And then a more active codependent is someone who tends to be pretty confident, as opposed to the more passive codependent. They may lack some confidence in their abilities and skills, lack the confidence to speak up. Whereas active codependents will speak up. They will push back. They will argue. They will tell you how they feel. And they're not afraid to do that, but it's still in a kind of protesting, controlling way, rather than just saying, hey, look, this is my boundary. These are my needs. If that's not going to work for you, we gotta either work it out or move on, right? They'll just continue to protest and continue to stay in the argument and continue to try to change their partner very actively versus just passively sitting there and taking what comes to them. So that's kind of, there's 2 versions of codependency.
Thank you. And I think that's all excellent for creating a foundation and helping us understand, or listeners, if you're seeing yourself in both of these styles or one of these styles, having been in one or maybe moving to another or healing from these, it'll be a nice foundation. And I have a question for you that maybe listeners are asking themselves. Why the overgiving? That's a critical part of the codependent. Why do they tend to overgive?
Yes, this brings us back to attachment theory. So they were conditioned to do so in childhood. It kept them safe in some way, shape, or form. And we can't really talk about any relationship dynamics or attachment dynamics without also talking about your nervous system and the impact it has on your behavior. So, our nervous system is this primitive system in our body that's meant to keep us safe. And it keeps us safe by sensing danger and responding to the danger, either by fighting or fleeing or fawning, which is kind of um, acting in a really loving way to get somebody to do what you want or avoid getting hurt by that person, or shutting down, right? Those are kind of your options with your nervous system: is fight, flight, fawn, shut down, or a combination of all those, which would be freeze. And our nervous system's primary only job in this world is to keep us safe, right? Sense danger, go into one of those responses to deal with the danger. So codependency is often a fawn response, a really overdeveloped fawn response, or a shutdown response where that's more the passive codependent, where you're just shutting down, kind of feeling helpless to do anything about your circumstances. And your nervous system's sort of collapsing in that way to keep you safe because it senses danger, but doesn't think there's anything it can do to change the danger. And therefore, it just helps you disconnect from your experience so that it doesn't hurt as much. It's not as painful.
It's a very beautiful and compassionate way of outlining it because you're right, our nervous system, very primitive and essential part of who we are. We learn these behaviors, listeners, early on in our lives, depending upon what's going on with us. And that's why this listener's question is especially poignant because it was normal for her. She must have been in, we're talking, if you don't resonate with the word or understand the word fawn, it's really, sometimes you hear it appease, but it's the same response. And you see it in animal behavior often, a dog who is frightened or scared, they might do a fawning or appeasing type of behavior, like, don't kick me, don't yell at me, don't hurt me. And so you're right, it's so common. And if you grew up in a home environment where it was really scary and you couldn't fight, you're little, you can't flee, you have nowhere else to go. You doesn't do much good to freeze because, the people are going to make you come out. Even if you retreat to your bedroom or a corner, those caregivers are going to pull you back in somehow. So often it is that parasympathetic nervous system part that, is either the freeze or appease that brings you in and has you do these kind of behavior that you're learning. If I can only make everyone happy, if I only can stay invisible, if I can only just do and do and do. And that's where, especially we can start moving into narcissistic abuse now, it's like candy for the narcissist. So let's move into that piece now that we've you've created this beautiful foundation. Please explain narcissism and then narcissistic abuse so that our listeners can understand your paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. So narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, is a diagnosable diagnosis in the DSM-5, but it's a pattern of behaviors where essentially somebody centers themselves most of the time. It's very much all about them. They lack empathy for other people's experience, meaning it's really hard for them to care about what other people are going through or even put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Often narcissistic relationships or a relationship with a narcissist can be very dramatic and erratic. Narcissism is part of a cluster of personality disorders that's called the dramatic and erratic personality disorders. So there's a lot of ups and downs. The beginning might feel like a complete fairy tale. This is the love bombing stage where they're really grooming you to think that they're this wonderful, loving, kind, attuned person who's going to give you the world and you just make your dreams come true, right? And somebody who has attachment wounding, which somebody with codependency would absolutely have attachment wounding from the past, they often feel inadequate deep down. And this feels like water in a dry desert. It's just feeding this part of you that's so malnourished and so underdeveloped. And it can feel almost unbelievable. Like this person who is so great thinks I'm all this and thinks that I'm worthy of all this love and attention and affection. And it can feel a little unsettling. And that's something you should listen to if it's happening and it feels a little unsettling. But because it's feeding this dry desert part of us, we often tend to ignore that feeling and move forward anyway. And this is where, Carla, you said earlier, somebody with a secure attachment might tune into that feeling a little bit more and go, something feels off here. I'm going to trust my intuition and move on. But somebody who wasn't allowed to trust their intuition or taught to trust their intuition as a kid because they had to cater to everyone else, like this person who wrote in, they just don't have that felt sense of what is true internally for me is actually true. I can trust that.
Absolutely, Sarah. And I've noticed too that often it's, even if they do have the felt sense, there's a red flag. Something's off. This is too good to be true. Oh, the narcissist is, their behaviors aren't adding up. They're saying one thing and doing another. Often it harkens back to childhood, where they had to learn to ignore all of those inconsistencies and red flags because life was full of them. Life was nothing but red flags and inconsistencies. So to them, it's normal, and they learn to disregard them because you can't stand up to these big people when you're little and they're doing things. And even if you do ask a question, you're likely to get squashed down for calling out something that's inconsistent or a red flag. So it's that they almost learn to disregard, even when that voice is clawing its way up, saying, listen, listen. They're, the other part of them saying, no, that didn't get me anywhere in the past. So it is that interesting, almost balance beam where you hear it, but you don't want to step off the balance beam and into what the monsters that might be underneath it. That can be even more difficult until you're in the relationship. So please continue. And I love also that I do want to add, listeners, what we're talking about here, NPD, Narcissistic Personality Disorder, as Sarah said, is a diagnosable clinical disorder. It's in the DSM-5. Many people today use the term narcissistic to mean anyone and anything, any behavior that is not suiting their needs or that seems selfish or self-absorbed. We are talking about the narcissistic spectrum. On one end is a normal amount of narcissistic tendencies that we all have. Then you get toward the middle and it gets, more pronounced. And then you go to the other end of the continuum. And there is where you have narcissistic personality disorder. And that's what we're focusing on today. So just wanted to clarify that. Okay, let's move in, Sarah, to narcissistic abuse.
Yes. So it starts with love bombing, as I've already described. It's a very fairy tale experience. Too good to be true. You're being showered with all kinds of love and affection and gifts and promises for the future. Things tend to move pretty quickly in this phase. And I find a lot of times my clients during this stage will say, it just, he wanted to get married and proposed, and I thought things were great. So I figured, well, this is really fast, but why not? It's awesome. It's great. So it's like this, it's like this momentum gets you going and maybe gets you committing to things that are against your better judgment, but you do it anyway. And at that point, then once the love bombing has kind of reeled you in to the point where you're committed in some way, shape, or form, then the devaluing starts. And devaluing can be really subtle, and it can happen so incrementally that sometimes you don't even notice it's happening. But what it is a breaking down of your self-esteem, a breaking down of you as a human, right? They might start criticizing you. The things that they loved about you before, they might start disliking. And also, some of this happens in any relationship, right? Like, we go through romantic love, and then we get into a power struggle, which is another stage of relationship. And we stop looking at our partner through rose-colored glasses. So I want to acknowledge that that's going to happen in any relationship, but the extremes with which it happens in this type of relationship are like stark, very different. So, they may
Let's
start.
pause there, because that is a very important piece that you're talking about, devaluing and criticism. In a healthy relationship, it doesn't look like devaluing and criticism. It would look more like, hey, I have a difference of opinion, or hey, I'm feeling hurt, or this isn't working for me. Can we try this? Which can be kind of power struggling in a way, because people are creating a home together. They're creating a life together. And we all have a tendency to want it to be the way that we're used to. But relationship requires us to create this joint decision making, this joint emotional field, and this joint area of respect. And the difference with the narcissist is that predominant push to, I want it my way.
And you must abandon yourself to make me.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that is absolutely the difference.
Okay. Continue, please.
Yeah. And in that stage, they might start to alienate you from friends and family, either by asking you to move away from them, or just talking about how they don't really like them, or they feel judged by them. And it can make a lot of sense, honestly. Again, this is like the frog that's in slightly warmer water, or for longer and longer, and then suddenly it's boiling and it doesn't even realize it's being boiled. That's kind of how narcissistic abuse can show up as well. And so it like sort of makes sense. You can kind of understand where they're coming from, and you can see that you can be stubborn in this way. And yeah, it makes sense they want you to work on yourself a little bit. But over time, you start to get more and more alienated from the people who love and care about you. You start to feel less and less like yourself. You start to feel less confident and less worthy of love. And often they'll say things like, who would want you? Or nobody else is going to put up with this. Things that kind of make you feel less than and inadequate.
And thank you. And I want to focus for a minute on the part where you're talking about that tendency to alienate, because that is such a big piece. It's almost like a spider with this web, and they're taking away anyone who can not that you need to be rescued, but can give you words of wisdom, anyone who can give you support. And because they want you for their very own, I call it having a robot in a closet. They want that robot in the closet to pull out. And that's what I mean. I'm agreeing with you in you say they want you to lose your sense of self, because they want you to be more like this thing that they can tuck away whenever they need it, or don't need it, pull it out when they need it, give it attention. If they want, shove it back in the closet. But this is a real human being with feelings, thoughts, family, friends. Yet, as you said so eloquently, it's like the frog in boiling water. And the water gets warmer and warmer and warmer, imperceptibly so. And then all of a sudden it's boiling. And it's like, oh my God, I'm dying. And that is the specialty, unfortunately, of the narcissist, or one of their specialties.
Yeah. And like this person who wrote in said, she didn't even recognize what was going on her whole life. And her daughter is sending TikTok. I think TikTok has been so illuminating for so many people about how indoctrinated they've been in their dysfunctional family dynamics. And that is a tactic of dysfunctional family systems as well as narcissistic relationships, is that you're made to feel like blood is thicker than water. Stick with family at all costs, or in this case, stick with my partner at all costs. Nobody's going to be there for you like they are. And it makes you not question. It's set up so that you don't question the terrible things that are happening or the uncomfortable things that are happening. And very often people who get in relationships like this had some element of that in childhood, some element of a dysfunctional family system that maybe it was children should be seen and not heard. And so they were just constantly dismissed and shut down, and maybe not abused in any way, but they were taught your voice doesn't matter here. And what you think and feel isn't important. It's not reality. Like, you might think this is wrong, but the adults in your life are telling you it's fine, you're fine. So you just turn off your intuition. You just stop listening to it. And that's kind of what happens in these relationships, that in the devaluing stage.
Absolutely. I agree. And that little voice inside the person often tends to, especially when they come to therapy, they're so hesitant about their reality.
Yeah.
Like, am I crazy? Am I the one who's off here? He says it's me. He says I'm mean and controlling and critical, but I'm not. I can't find it. And yet they do a lot. The narcissist, another one of their specialties is projection. They don't want to look at anything going on inside them. They don't want to do the inner work. It's too inconvenient. It's too unimportant. They really want to project any of their issues out onto other people, and even have that level of awareness can be very difficult for them.
And threatening to their ego.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Core of narcissism is this fear that they are inadequate, or this deep knowledge that they're inadequate. And so anything that gets too close to uncovering that, even the most minor amount of feedback about behavior that was hurtful or inappropriate in any way, whew, yeah, that hits too close to home. That is so deeply defended. It will get spit right back at you. You were inappropriate. You were, whatever it was, projected right back on you.
Yes. And the stop criticizing me mantra, just for bringing up something that's hurtful, is a very common dynamic. Now, let's segue. I know I'm taking us away from narcissistic abuse for a moment, but let's segue back to attachment styles. So we're understanding what's happening for the person who's being victimized. And I don't use that word lightly. Because for someone who's listening and saying, but I'm not a victim, I'm talking about the fact that there is a perpetrator and there's the person who's the object of the perpetrator. That person is a victim. They aren't doing something wrong. It's just the state of having somebody go after you, and what that signals to the nervous system. So, attachment style for the person who is narcissistic. What do you see? I have tended to see a lot of a mixture of the person who's very dismissive, avoidant, the person who is very anxious, preoccupied, and then a lot of the disorganized type. What is your clinical experience?
More avoidant. I'd say narcissism. If you look at narcissism and codependency on a spectrum, we all fall somewhere on that spectrum, and narcissism are folks who are much more self-oriented. They think about their own needs. Codependents are much more others-oriented. They think about others' needs before their own. And if we look at this from an attachment spectrum as well, avoidant attachment tends to think more about their own needs, and anxious attachment tends to think more about other people's needs and abandon themselves in favor of keeping the connection. So you will see more narcissists on the avoidant end of the spectrum, but very often narcissistic personality disorder is the result of abuse in childhood or trauma in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that produces disorganized attachment, which is a combination of anxious and avoidant. So, yeah, I mean, that's exactly right, that you'll see that combination a lot of the time, because a personality disorder is a pretty severe impairment and diagnosis. And to get to the point where you have a personality disorder, it's usually a pretty severe experience in childhood.
Absolutely. And the piece which gives me a great deal of compassion and empathy for certain narcissists, not all of them. I try and have compassion and empathy for everyone, but more for the ones who are deeply wounded, where there is that very anxious child in there that was maybe there was a dad who was an alcoholic and a mom who was maybe otherwise engaged, too many kids, or trying to please the dad or trying to make a home or work. And that little child that is inside that narcissist, particularly the wounded narcissist, is often very anxious. And as were saying, it comes out in that very disorganized, unresolved style. But again, that little anxious child is inside there screaming, help, help, but they make it all about them. That's their key coping strategy.
Yeah. And I really want to just call out that even though you can see the trauma from which this came, it does not mean it's an excuse for the behavior, or you should be trying to find empathy and tolerance if you're being abused. Almost every abuser has had some sort of traumatic experience. That's how they got the way they are. But that doesn't mean you need to put up with it. And it doesn't mean you need to stay.
100%. And they're almost two distinct realms. One having the understanding, the empathy, and possibly some compassion, but never in any situation, no matter how much empathy and compassion, do we tolerate abuse. And that is a big part of the victim's growth curve in realizing I'm a good person. This is the victim talking, doing their work so they can see I'm a good person. I'm worthy. I can, see this and maybe feel badly for this person, but this is not okay. And if they want to stay in the relationship, which is often really, really hard, because I believe I've seen narcissists change, people with NPD, but it's very rare. They have to want to do the work. Would you agree?
Yes. I think the reason most of the time if you see a change in somebody with true NPD, it's because it benefits them in some way, not because they're developing empathy or changing. I think that sometimes complex trauma gets misdiagnosed as personality disorders. And once you address the trauma and heal it, you see change. But I don't think those people actually had NPD, probably. They just had complex trauma and were highly defended and were in a constant state of nervous system dysregulation. NPD is one of the only other, aside from autism and ADHD and intellectual disabilities, things that are differences in how your brain functions, and they are constant, and they're not going to biologically change. They're pervasive disorders. That's the category. And narcissism is the only other pervasive disorder. So it's along those lines of things that aren't going to change. You're neurodiverse, right? You just are how you are, and you can adapt, and you can find ways to make it work for you and those around you. But ultimately, it's how your brain's set up.
I like this perspective. I've heard different perspectives. And so I like this as an interesting perspective on perhaps that the brain's neuroplasticity from your mindset, what you see is that it's so firmly entrenched, no matter the work, their brain, their neuroplasticity is not going to allow them to change. I'm the eternal optimist, so that's where I come from. I've been that way since childhood, so it persists, talking about persistent things. So let's look at the point where if somebody's questioning, am I a victim of narcissistic abuse? What would you say to them? What are some coping strategies, some tactics, So both coping strategies for how to deal with the person where there's narcissistic abuse, because it can get pretty intense. They can be like, I don't know, like an array of bullets sometimes hitting the other person. What would you have to say about someone who's wondering, what are some tips? What are some coping strategies?
There's a lot I want to say here. I think one thing is it's so helpful to learn about your nervous system and how it functions and how it's trying to protect you, but ways that it might be misguided, right? Ways that you might be carrying experiences from childhood into current day. And those things helped you stay attached to your caretakers and helped you stay alive in childhood. But they may actually be hurting you in adulthood. And it's because your nervous system hasn't got the message that you can do something about it. You're safe. You have passed through the danger. So learning about how to get into a more regulated nervous system state from which you can access intuition and trust and self-understanding and self-reflection, that is such a key component. So that would be the first thing, is just, understanding polyvagal theory. And you can do a Google search on it, or, look it up on any platform and just learn what are the different nervous system states and what am I in primarily? Like, what's my home base nervous system state? And then from there, I would engage in somatic practices, which are body-based practices to help you really learn to soothe your nervous system. Because again, like, you can make good, solid decisions if you are in a regulated state and if you are connected to your intuition. It's just getting you back there.
Absolutely. And this is another good place to pause. So, listeners, polyvagal theory, in short, we can just look at it as your nervous system often, for all of us, goes from a place of regulation to dysregulation, regulation to dysregulation. In a healthier individual, they're in regulation more often than not. And if they get dysregulated, upset, angry, off balance, they have the tools to bring themselves back to a more grounded place. So, what can you do? Some takeaways. You can learn breathing practices. You can meditate. You can journal. You can go for a 5-minute walk, a 10-minute walk, an hour walk. You can do some yoga. You can lift some weights, whatever it is that helps you come back to your center. One of the things that won't work, I think, Sarah, you'll agree with this, is trying to talk it out with a narcissistic abuser when they're in full mode. That one is surefire to make them more dysregulated, make you more dysregulated. So instead of doing that, learning to call a timeout and not engage. Doesn't mean you're accepting, it means you're having a boundary, and we'll talk more about boundaries in a minute, but having a boundary where you say, no, I'm not having this conversation. This isn't healthy for me. What do you think of that, Sarah?
Yeah, I think those are great strategies. And then kind of on a larger scale, it's getting help from whoever, a friend, a therapist, a coach, somebody that can kind of help you see the truth about what's happening, and in a loving way guide you into your truth, right? Your self-knowledge, your trusting your intuition again. The way that I often work with clients like this is through somatic practices and through a type of therapy that helps you reprocess past attachment traumas that are keeping you stuck in current day. So finding a good therapist, I think, is always an essential factor to healing from narcissistic abuse and learning how to deal with a relationship that where you're going through this.
Absolutely. And getting to the roots of the codependency. Again, no blame, no shame, but starting to look at it to realize, why do I do what I do?
Yep.
Why am I doing this? And if I want to shift the patterns, That also means shifting me and the way I engage, which again, beauty of neuroplasticity is that we can change, whether you're 5, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, however old you are, your brain has the power to change with work. And I agree with you on getting support. Sometimes friends aren't objective enough. Sometimes they are. Sometimes we have really wise soul friends who can help us and listen to us. Domestic violence support groups often are free and incredibly helpful. Having a pastor, a mentor, a psychotherapist, a woman's support group, any gender support group where you can start detangling. So no matter, I have a sense that the listener who wrote in isn't, she's probably a little older, not, 18 or 30 or 40, but it sounds as if getting some perspective and starting to understand, oh, what I've been subjected to isn't healthy for me. And so she has the opportunity to create the awareness, the understanding, the strength that will help her start setting boundaries. And it won't be easy. Change is never easy. People push back, especially narcissists. They love to push back because they don't like the change in the status quo. And that's a big part to be aware of, that your world won't look the same. There will be upheaval, but it doesn't mean that you need to withstand the abuse as things start to shift. What do you think of that whole realm right there?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And one thing to know about when you start setting boundaries and holding boundaries is just because somebody's pushing back on them doesn't mean you shouldn't be setting them or holding them. A lot of times when we're learning boundaries for the first time, it can feel terrifying to say no or to say, I don't like that. And especially if you get pushed back, which you're going to if you're in a relationship like we've been talking about, just don't give up. Don't make that mean you're doing something wrong. It just means that the person who's been benefiting from your lack of boundaries is upset about it.
Absolutely. And I've noticed, I don't know if you've seen this, where the narcissist will often employ tactics where they're saying they're setting a boundary, but they're actually stonewalling. When they'll say their piece, they'll download, they'll vomit. And then when it comes your turn to offer your opinion, they'll say, no, I have a boundary around this. Don't cross this boundary. When really it's not a boundary, it's a rule that creates inequity.
Right. It's abuse.
It's abuse.
Yeah.
Perfectly said. Well, Sarah, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. I have a website, coupleslearn.com. And if you're on social media, Instagram is the same, Couples Learn.
And I understand you also offer some courses where.
We do. Yeah. So I have a course. There's two courses that I think would be relevant to this conversation. One is a short 1 hour webinar that gives you a lot more info about codependency. It's called Codependency 101. And then the other is a longer multi-week course called Getting to Secure Attachment. Most folks who are in relationships like this have an insecure attachment. And one of the ways to heal is to learn how to have a secure attachment. And that can be changed, by the way, just to give people hope out there. You're not stuck with your attachment style. So that course is to help folks kind of learn what does a securely attached relationship look and feel like, and how do I embody secure attachment within myself and in my relationship.
And thank you for affirming that secure attachment surely can be earned. My fourth book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, which is based on attachment theory, I talk about it in there that's one of the beauties of doing this work, that we can earn, if you, no matter what type of insecure attachment you have, again, it's a continuum, and that you can do the work to create that internal world of secure attachment. And that's the beauty of being human, that we can often change if we put the effort behind it. So thank you so much for being with us today. It's been such a delight. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. As always, it's a privilege and a joy. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.